comprehensive treaty governing the rights and responsibilities of states in the oceans. It's referred to as a constitution for the oceans. It contains provisions related to sustainable use of marine resources, including fisheries, and management and conservation of marine biodiversity, that is life in the marine environment. Another very important treaty is the Convention on Biological Diversity, CDB. It is a major international treaty that also promotes conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity in its entirety. And then there's also the Ramsar Convention, emphasizing the sustainable use of wetlands and recognizing their ecological, cultural, and economic value. CITES is also another one, international treaty that regulates trade in wild plants and animals to ensure their survival and to prevent overexploitation of these species. It includes provision on the sustainable management and conservation of species that are traded internationally. All right, and more recently we have the Sustainable Development Goals, which is a comprehensive framework aimed at transforming the world to more sustainable, for a more sustainable future. It's a call to action to end poverty and inequality, to protect the planet, ensure that all people enjoy health, justice, and prosperity, and use the renewable natural resources in a sustainable manner. No one is to be left behind. And Goal 14 establishes the framework for sustainable use of the oceans and marine living resources. And all our countries are committed and have committed themselves to realizing the Sustainable Development Goals. So, you know, Goal 14 addresses protection and restoration of the marine ecosystem and ensuring that fisheries is transformed to be sustainable and, using tools such as marine protected area, disciplining subsidies, and addressing the special needs of small-scale fishers. So a comprehensive framework to ensure sustainable use of our marine living resources. Now, looking closer at the regional framework, there are some important conventions and instruments that we have. The Cartagena Convention and the SPAR Protocol, again, there's a strong commitment there to the sustainable use principle. There's also the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas that addresses sustainable use of the marine living resources. The agreement establishing the CRFM, the organization I work with, and the Caribbean Community Common Fisheries Policy also speak to this. And yesterday, just yesterday, the 13th special meeting of the Ministerial Council of the CRFM adopted the regional protocol under the Caribbean Community Common Fisheries Policy on the principle of sustainable use of marine living resources for blue economic growth and sustainable development of CRFM member states. A very important new instrument that clarifies and elaborates and provide more detailed rules and guidance to apply the principle to ensure adherence and implementation at the national and local level of the principle. And this has become necessary because of challenges. The truth is we have seen confusion, and I would even say a drift away from this important principle of sustainable use of marine resources. I mean, I know there are some conservation groups who believe that many of the marine resources should not be used or should be protected rather than used, but that doesn't make sense to us because we depend on these resources for food, for livelihood, for existence, for economic development. And we are going to be, as small states, smaller and developing states, we are going to be even more dependent on these resources in our waters for development. And so we have to find a way. The important thing, though, is that, look, the fish stocks, all the living marine resources, they have they generate what you call in fisheries, a technical term, surplus production, surplus. So in other words, you can harvest a certain amount of all these resources and it will not, if you take the surplus, it will not undermine the underlying health and productivity of the fish stock. And that is what we should be aiming to do. Identify what is the surplus that we can take without jeopardizing the stocks and compromising the production at the optimum sustainable levels. So that is a challenge. And ladies and gentlemen, that is my presentation on this subject of sustainable use. I know you're going to hear more about this, and Joanne will be telling you a little more about the recent protocol, the protocol that we adopted, the ministers adopted yesterday. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Horton, for your very informative presentation and for setting the tone for our discussions that will take place a little bit later on. I'm sure there are lots of questions and comments, but I'll ask you to save those towards the end so we get through all of the presentations. Then we'll open the floor for questions. But I still foreshadow that I will have a few questions pertaining to your presentation that I think everyone would like to hear the answer to. But with that, I'll ask Mr. Reginald Severin's presentation to be brought up, and so we can go ahead with his presentation on the sustainable use of the living marine resources in Caribbean states, a national perspective from Dominica. Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead, Mr. Severin.
Good afternoon, everyone. As he's putting up the slides, I'm just currently the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry responsible for fisheries out in Dominica. And I'm a farmer by nature, but my association with fisheries is that I have spent the past 15 years directly involved in the training of fishers. I work with our current minister, responsible for fisheries. That's Honorable Julian Defoe, who was supposed to be sitting here during this presentation, but unfortunately had to keep house while we came up here. So I'm sitting in for him. But we have worked together over the past 15 years training fishers. And we have trained over 1,300 fishers in Dominica in all aspects of fisheries management, fisheries use, and fisheries area management. So as the slide comes up, my presentation is basically on what Mr. Milton has presented, but rather than look at a global viewpoint, I'm looking at the Dominica context. So we have very similar presentation, but I'm just zeroing in on Dominica. I think it should be almost here.
Yes, while we wait for that presentation to be brought up, I'll just welcome Mr. Lapointe, who's now joined us online. So we look forward to his presentation as well. Mr. Severin?
Yes, if he wants to use my system and he just hook it up. Huh? Oh, he has it. Oh, okay. There we go. So I'm looking at the sustainable use of living marine resources in Dominica. This is just an outline of what I'll be speaking about. Mr. Milton mentioned a number of the issues threatening the marine space, and also what is the stock of fish that we have in Dominica. And most importantly, what the message that I would like to send today is what we intend to do on the sustainable use of our living resources, marine resources in Dominica. This is a synopsis of our marine environment in Dominica. I have used this particular large photo because that's the community, the beachfront where I grew up, spent all my life. And it is just a reflection of what we have in Dominica. Very extensive marine space, and 652 coastal kilometers square, with a 28,000 kilometers exclusive economic zone. Based on what he showed for the world, I have here what Dominica component reflects on that. So in our land area, we just have 750 kilometers square, but our ocean space is 28,000 kilometers square. In the OECS region, that's a ratio of 1 to 81. In Dominica, it's much lower. So our land to ocean space ratio is much less compared to the rest of the OECS countries. And that gives you a perspective. We have a very expansive biodiversity, and it's associated with our name, Waitikubuli, which is the Kalinago name for Dominica. Tall is her body. But what most people do not see is deep is her soul, because the mountains cascade down into the seabed as tall, as long, as high as the mountains go up. So along these coastal fronts, going down, sometimes just 10 feet away from the shelf, the foreshore, you have what you call declines, very deep gullies going down. And along these traverse is a beautiful marine environment with a seabed that is very expansive. On our commitments, we have what you call real life below water. It is something that we celebrate in Dominica. The problem is, to what extent do we utilize these resources? But I would like you to be aware of this triangle. Typically, you will think that the large eaters, the herbivores, would be the largest population in your living organisms web, your food web. So on land, you will find that you have more herbivores, less carnivores, and by the time you go to predators, you have less. So on land, it's the reverse. One of the ways that you can know whether you are checking the health of your marine space, your ocean space, is to look at the inversion of the web. Because the largest predators in the ocean is one of the deadly whales, and they are the largest animals in the ocean space. So the herbivores are basically microorganisms, very micro, very small, and so they actually occupy the smallest area within the ocean space, and then you have your large predators, or your large, what you call carnivores and herbivores mixed, omnivores on the top of the food chain. And Dominica has the entire trajectory of this, and this is actually a true reflection of our ocean space in Dominica. You meet all the species of animals. Here are some findings about that actual space. There is the building network from our coral reefs, and we have extensive research in those areas. Acropara palmata is one of our main sea marine animals or plant. And one of the things is that what they do, they measure the health of the coral reefs by finding, if in case they find this species in our waters. Where you find low concentration of this species, it means that severe death and destruction is happening on the coral reefs. In some of the research done by Steiner and some others over the past years, we found out that quite a lot of our coral reefs are endangered. And I will express some of the reasons this is happening, some of the threats that we have associated with our marine space. There is one misconception that because we are called the Nature Isle of the Caribbean, and that we have all these various activities, there is a misconception that all these hurricanes and storms have no impact on our marine space. Unfortunately, this is not so. Simply because it's not visual to the eyes, the perception is that the hurricanes pass, it damages the land, but the sea is in check and everything is okay. I would like to inform that this is a misconception, and we have to be very careful about how we use our marine resources following a storm, because a lot of damages could happen to the coral reefs. For example, in Dominica, after Maria, quite a lot of the logs that came down from the rivers and the gullies that found their way onto the coastal area, damaged a lot of the reefs. Over time created new environments for new creatures to grow, but did significant damages. Also, the siltation and all these things that come down with these storms also create a danger for the sublittoral habitats that we have across the Dominica. Another piece of information that I would like to share with you is that our seagrass beds, which a lot of people don't think of, but as we have rich forest and we have 62% of our country covered with forest, many of you who have visited Dominica or who will be visiting very soon will actually see that what happens on land is also what is happening in the sea. And one of the largest marine organism or living marine resource that we have is our seabed ecosystem. And it is covered with a lot of seagrass. And that is very helpful because it helps to sustain the life below water. Another piece of information is that the 46 grams per meter square is our fishable biomass on our coral reefs based on the last research. The average, when it is bad, is between 20 to 40. If your fishable biomass is calculated between 20 to 40, it says that something is bad. So by telling you that it is 46, it means that there is a threat there, and that if we don't take certain actions, that it can become real bad. So right now, it's fringing on becoming a terrible situation for us in Dominica. And also, the amount of marine space that we have protected, the irony of it is that 97% of our marine and coral reefs are not under protection. And that is one of the areas that we're looking for to improve our existing marine protected areas. These are some of the fishable species that we have. If you recall Milton's slide, and he showed the number of species visually, we have quite a large array of coastal pelagic species, deep slope species, that is bottom feeders. We have a lot of demersal species. We do not have a lot of conch, and if we do, they maybe are unreachable, and we would have to go in the depth and do some deep investigation to find out where they are. But we have very limited conch, and I'm stressing this because I had a good conch here in Bahamas, and I'd advise you to partake. We also have the deep sea pelagic species, quite a lot out here. And we have extensive sea moss production, both Eugema and Gracilia species being cultivated down in Dominica. Some other information that I would like to share with you is we import quite a lot of fish. Despite having this large marine resource base and ocean space in Dominica, fish imports is the second highest imported commodity in Dominica when it comes to food. We import last year over $28 million worth of food, of which poultry meat was the first and fish was the second. When you relate that, that gives you an understanding that despite having large resource of living marine resources, that we still depend on the outside to feed us when it comes to fish. And that is an area that we have to look at. We have an exploitation annual catch distributed mostly from the reef. 16% comes from reef. 5% come from deep slope, and you can understand why. It is not deep as the word spells. It is deep, very deep, and sometimes inaccessible, except for explorers and individuals that can do some of the crazy things in the world. We have quite a beautiful array of diving sites. We are in the top 10 diving sites in the world, can be found in Dominica. And of course, we have this last expanse of migratory species. And Very important to note that, but that forms around 34% of our fisheries catch in Dominica. One of the problems that we have is the resources required for facilitating and managing these marine resources is our cooperation with Japan in building fisheries complexes across the country. We have 3 of them, and they are like aggregators where the fishermen land their fish. I'm showing you the kind of collections that we have, 11,200 on average, and if we get 1,000 out of that from fees that the fisherman has to pay. But we actually operate those facilities on average $41,000 a month. So you could see some level of unsustainability is happening across our fisheries sector. This sets into context that while we are discussing the sustainable use of living marine resources, that because we are presented Dominica case, it does not mean that we have a sustainable system or a perfect system. And this information just gives you a glimpse of how unsustainable your systems can be, despite being rich, diverse, and very much of high value to your country. So what do? Well, we try to celebrate now and again, and I would just like to extend. If you observe that there is nothing before September, October, so book the dates and ensure that you are part of these festivities. At the end of the year, of the month, we'll have our World Creole Music Festival, but all these festivals are centered around food. And one of the main foods that these festivals promote is fish. And it is important to understand that there is a relationship between our fisheries, our living marine resources, and our health and our food. And so it is important, but we do celebrate them, and we will be highlighting all of these as we go along. This historical analysis just summarizes what I have said earlier on, and it gives you a snapshot of the trends, the threats, the impacts, and some of the opportunities that we have in the fisheries sector in Dominica. So based on this, let's look at what is happening. Currently, we recognize that there is an imbalance between the exploitation of our living marine resources and the exploration aspect. And what we want to do is to be able to move away from pure exploitation activities more into exploration activities. In other words, in local parlance, come and see what we have, and we will have an economy out of that. So what do we have? And what is the key behind Dominica's blue economy that we are pursuing? First, for us to understand that, we have to look at what are the risks and the threats we are faced. And if you read along, you will see that there's quite a lot of issues that is threatening that could lead to the overall degradation of our marine space and our ocean space. And apart from the threats from the natural environment, we also have human conflicts and other risks that is associated with human interaction with the living marine resources in Dominica. IUU issues is major for us. We are found between the DOMs, between the two French countries. We are surrounded by French countries. And if you know the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, when we fought with, the English fought with the French, and Dominica is the only island in that little ring that is not French because of a wise action by one of our British Navy sailors who was able to trick the French outside of Les Saintes and cause his whole fleet to be lost. And so Dominica ended up being claimed by the British. But we are originally a Kalinago country. And so they had a rich history of fishing, because what they did, they moved from the Orinoco and they actually traversed up the island and sailed through. So they had this seafaring activity happening. And we have all these attributes of our fisheries, but all these things are at risk because of our basic living activities, intensive fishing. We have overfished our reefs, and now the biomass, fishable biomass is way down compared to how it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. We do a lot of use of pesticides and fertilizers upland. So what happens upland is affecting what happens down at the reef. We have sewage, we have litter, all these various things, including the increased cruise ship calls, is having a direct impact on our fisheries space. The areas that are impacted most, as I lay them out here, are our shorefronts. The last I will read, the B rooms. Both the bedroom and the boardroom is affecting and impacting our fisheries resource. What is discussed at the home, how we use fish, what fishes that we eat, what size of fishes that we cook is having a direct impact on our fisheries management and our habitats. Farmers, because of livelihoods, will indiscriminately catch any fish, and they will catch any fish anywhere. And they will catch any fish anywhere at any time. And so it is creating what you call a cascading effect on depletion of the fisheries resources, that if we don't take corrective action immediately, we could lose our rich biodiversity in our fishing sector in Dominica. So these things are very critical to be noted, and we think of it. So the whole question is, when we look at our economic performance, how does that translate into actual livelihood or economic returns for Dominica? And if you see fisheries subsector, very minuscule, very small compared to our crop sector in Dominica. Looking at $7.23 million per annum in 2016. And you could see the impact that Maria had in terms of the decline that we had as a result of Maria in 2017, where you see economic loss and we loss of GDP, and see the sort of loss even the fisheries sector had. So we have all these threats, these exogenous threats, both environmental and human threats, that is affecting the overall performance. And we are saying here, there lies an opportunity based on the rich, diverse marine resources that we have in Dominica. We have an opportunity. And so we are all in line with international commitments and certain the SDGs and life on the water, and looking at how do we do that. So our plan is, and in 2019 we set up what we call the Ministry of Blue and Green Economy. So we have signaled to the world that we're going to develop a blue economy. And our blue economy is vast. There are many areas, and the part that I cut out in red, it just shows that we're not directly involved seriously in this. But all the others, there are 13 of them, all the others forms part of the blue economy for us. And if you observe right now, based on our GDP returns, it is small. We are a small SIS, and you should figure out what that means. As Milton mentioned earlier on, we are a small island state. But what we plan to do in developing our blue economy is to stop looking at ourselves as a small island state and to emerge as a large ocean state. And how do we do that? This is where we have recovered after Maria. We have actually recovered after Maria, and we're back to normal. But the question is, how do we get to become this large ocean state that can maximize the benefits out of our living marine resources that we are very well endowed with in Dominica? And this is what our mandate is. We want to sustainably develop a resilient agriculture and fishery sector, and a blue and green economy that contributes a minimum of $700 million to national output or GDP. If you observe, we're just at 253 right now. So we have a $425 million climb that we intend to do. And how do we intend to do that? There are certain aspects that we intend to do. One, since 1987, we passed Fisheries Act, We have never had wide sweeping regulations. So in IUU, we never had regulations regulating the sector. As of May 2023, we were able to successfully pass our first set of sweeping regulations to regulate the fishing sector in Dominica. And hopefully these will be widespread among fishers, among stakeholders, to know that we have regulated the sector. So everything that we do now will be based on pure regulations. The other thing that we want to do is to improve fish handling. If you observe in the first picture, that's the typical way fish is prepared for sale to the community. You go on the side roads in Roseau, you will find people just cutting, chopping fish right off the roads, and that is the way it is. That's the way of life. And we know that that is a food safety issue and a lot of issues with our health, and we need to move away from that. So a lot of our regulations is addressing that, but with regulations come the infrastructure. We have to invest in the appropriate mechanisms to ensure that those regulations make sense. And so we'll be developing means to improve post-harvest management of fish. The other thing that we have is the improvement of fishing fleet. And as we discussed this morning, we're looking at our boat building capacity. We're training up to 15 people is being trained in Dominica right now to build boats and to build more sturdy user boats, user-friendly boats for the fishermen, and to build that capacity so we're able to have a replacement fleet anytime something goes wrong. We have lost over 65% of our fleet during Maria, and so it shows the impact that we could have on disaster, natural disaster on our fisheries sector. The other thing that we have done is to look at promoting scientific research in respect to marine living resources as one of our commitments. Just last month, we signed off a MOU with Commonwealth UK, where we're going to look at developing a scientific research and development innovation institute in Dominica, providing marine studies, science studies to young people. And with Project SETI, who is studying whales in Dominica, they actually started out a fellowship for young people under the age of 23, where they're able to study marine science. This is our blue economy. It lies with our whales. Dominica is the home of over 500 whales. And I'll give you evidence that that is so, because you can't see them until the surface, and you may think because it's a migratory species that it is unlikely that you find it resident in the waters of Dominica. But whale, as a large marine species, is actually in love with deep waters. And as a result of that, you find that because of the depth of the soul of Dominica, that these animals actually make a home there. And if you see this research study, it shows the watching intensities that you will see that you could actually see a whale at any given 48 hours. If you go out there and search them, you can see a whale. So whale watching is a big thing in Dominica. It brings around 1.8 million right now. But this is just cake change. This basically doesn't reflect the true value of the resource for us. So we want to develop it and help as the basis for our blue economy in Dominica. I have here just little evidence of it, but I will share the thing. It doesn't want to come on screen. But basically what happened, a little miracle happened last month in Dominica. We had a group of scientists all over the world converging and sitting and discussing the whaling issue, the marine environment, and the Project SETI, which is investigating whales in Dominica. And a beautiful thing happened. There was a birth of a baby whale, or just a few days before we started that huge conference. And if you go on YouTube, sperm whale, you search sperm whale Dominica, you'll be able to get, I had a video of it there, but it doesn't want to play. But definitely, they were able to film the actual birth. But the beauty of it is that in the birth process, there is around 7 to 8 other female surrounding immediately assisting the birth. And in the outer band is a ring of dolphins that is circulating right around and creating a protective ring around the whales. And this was filmed, and it is a really beautiful sight to see. But the fact that the animal actually gave birth right in the waters outside of Dominica, it's an indication that there is residency, okay? And so we have a high resident population of whales in Dominica. And so what do we intend to do? We intend to protect it.
Excuse me one
Yeah.
second, Mr. Servant. Just, I was reminded that we are supposed to be done at 3 p.m., so I'll ask you to conclude very soon so the others can have a chance to present. But thank you very much for your information-rich presentation.
Thank you. So I've just round up, and as a result of that, we intend to protect the animals. So this, by summary, is the capstone of our blue economy. We want to develop it. We want to be able to look at how we can invite each and every one of you to come and just see the whales, swim with the whales, and we can generate enough economic benefits to go back and protect the whales and also have a livelihood. I thank you.
Yes, thank you again, Mr. Severin. And so we'll move right along to Mr. Lapointe. So I'll ask Mr. Lapointe to get ready to present. And while that presentation is being brought up, I'll reflect on a time when I was a student at the University of the West Indies, Surmis. Dominica was highlighted as the epitome of ecotourism, in that it was recognized that a lot of emphasis was placed on protecting the environment versus tourism numbers. So it's interesting to see that tourism is still recognized as a threat to the environment. And so with that, hopefully our next presentation and Mr. Lapointe are ready to go.
Of slides in my presentation. I'm going to go rather quickly through the PowerPoint presentation itself. And so maybe it'd be easier for me if I simply share my screen with all members of the panel. Is it possible for you to allow for that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So, yes, you can. Please go ahead.
Okay. So let's try to locate my presentation.
Yes, they just made it available to you, so go ahead and try to share, please. Okay, we are seeing a list of files.
And participants in my presentation.
We don't see a presentation, but we see a list of files.
Okay, there it is. Thank you, Chair, again, for allowing me to be part of this very important meeting. And
Yes, it's sort of stalled on this end. We're still not seeing it.
Take some time to complete.
oh,
Not to do anything.
Okay, the advice is to wait just a minute and not do anything, and we'll see if the presentation comes up on our end.
Sometimes there's a delay.
can you see it now, Chair?
No, we do not.
You are screen sharing.
Per, per, per,
Click on it again, Eugene.
perhaps click out of your desktop, open the presentation into presentation mode, then share again of the open presentation.
That's usually the best way.
Screen sharing.
We're seeing it now, but it's not in presentation mode. We're seeing the open file.
Yes, it's clear enough for us to see, so you can go ahead and present from that mode.
Okay, and, well, okay, maybe I should simply start by saying again that I like to approach the whole problem of fisheries and the sustainability of fisheries from a historical angle. We learn from the anthropology, even the archaeology, that at the beginning of time there were two major categories of what was known as noble. PowerPoint, and like simply to add up that if you have a chance to look at my recent.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Lapointe. Your presentation was well received. It was succinct, but nonetheless very informative and interesting. I will certainly look forward to reading that book. And so I would like for us to now move on to the presentation of Ms. Messiah, and then we'll hopefully have time for a few questions. Thank you again, Mr. Lapointe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Okay, I will be addressing the issue of the sustainable use principle of marine living resources, and just to have us have a better appreciation and understanding of what the principle entails and the challenges as we seek to promote it, implement it, and defend it. You would have heard other speakers say that the marine environment in the Caribbean plays a significant role in the socio-economic development of CRFM member states as small island developing states. Historically, our people have relied upon the vast marine living resources to provide innumerable benefits to their lives and existence, and these would include employment, livelihoods, food and nutrition security. I want to add here and encourage us to put this terminology into our vocabulary: food sovereignty and building resilience in our respective countries. Sorry. Thank you. I'm going to come back to that. Oops. What's happening? Okay. Hmm? This work? There we go. Thank you. Right. Now, we are aware that there are numerous global challenges involving food production generally, occasioned by the escalating cost of living. We saw most recently during the COVID-19 pandemic the interruptions to the global food supply chain. And so, given the uncertainties of future pandemics, we are of the view that the oceans will be the primary source of food production for our people here in the Caribbean, and more people the world over will begin to rely on the marine living resources as their primary food source. Now, in the context of the blue economic growth, the sustainable use of our oceans and our marine living resources present unprecedented opportunities for social and economic development to create wealth and improve the living standards of our people. We go to the issue of what is sustainable use. And in the context of this discussion, it refers to the careful and responsible use of living marine resources by sovereign countries and our right to harvest these resources in a way that is responsible and does not threaten the existence of any other species, in order to ensure that there are resources for both current and future generations. It also requires us to manage our resources responsibly to ensure healthy populations of species and ecosystems in order to avoid depletion, degradation, and overexploitation. Now, you may ask, what is a living marine resource? And as it says here, it refers to any marine organism that is utilized by humans for food, animal feed, raw materials in the manufacturing process, for the production of cosmetics, medicines, and other pharmaceuticals or materials, and recreational uses. And they're not just limited to fish and crustaceans, but they include seagrass, algae, and other microorganisms. Now, the principle in itself, as you would have heard the other speakers say, is well established. It recognizes and respects the sovereign rights, particularly those of coastal communities, to, as I said just now, to harvest our resources in such a way that we ensure that there is the preservation of these species for future generations. So harvesting must be done in a sustainable manner to ensure the conservation of individual species. Now, in discussing sustainable use, we also have to say something about conservation. And in the context of this discussion, conservation refers to a series of actions which seek to safeguard the health, productivity, and vibrancy of marine habitats, natural ecosystems, and other available marine resources. Those efforts tend to focus on protecting, preserving, and restoring natural resources within the marine environment. Now, there's a very common misperception that sustainability and conservation are mutually exclusive terms, and they are not. They are the opposite sides of the same coin. And I'm sure many of us have been at international fora where there are those who are particularly committed to ensuring that there is a dichotomy between sustainable use and conservation. But in the context of this discussion, what is important is the issue of balance. Because as you know, where there are rights, there are responsibilities. And so ultimately, the conservationists and the sustainable use advocates are seeking to ensure that there is long-term abundance and protection of biodiversity. And so that there is no fight, there is no war. And we as sustainable use advocates have to convince more of our people to understand this. Now, the principle also underpins and appreciates the importance of these values and realities: sovereign rights, respect for culture and heritage, the right to food, which is a universally accepted human right, the preservation of societal benefits, and this is where we talk about the growth and socioeconomic repositioning of our people, particularly the most vulnerable, protecting the rights of small-scale fishers, gender inclusivity, to include the inclusion of our youth and differently abled populations as vulnerable groups, the contribution to foreign exchange, which Milton would have spoken about, and the reduction of our food import bill, which is critical. We are islands surrounded by waters, yet we are addicted almost to importing food that is not natural, that is laden with preservatives and hormones, when right here, surrounding us, are some of the most healthy food sources that we need. We have got to change that. I also wish to say that the whole issue of food sovereignty, I feel very passionately about food sovereignty, because there are others, notably from many landlocked countries, who want to tell us what we should eat, when we should eat it, how we should prepare it, and we must reject that. Our people historically have lived their lives from the resources of the ocean. And as I said yesterday, before the notion of closed seasons came about legislatively, our people knew that if they continually harvested these marine living resources, they could possibly face an issue of extinction. And so they knew that at a certain time, they should just leave the species alone to allow them to become more abundant. In terms of the sustainable use principle, there are two approaches that we must also be mindful of. One being the precautionary principle. This is a principle that says, let's be safe. Let's take some precaution here. It's a way to manage risks before harm arises, except that it is not based on any scientific basis or sound data. And so it is good in the sense that if it is to be used as a temporary measure, it's okay. But it ought never to be the basis on which policies are developed because it conflicts with the rational decision-making approach. In life, there will always be risks in any situation, but we cannot become overly sentimental in terms of our approach to policy formation. The ecosystem approach is the preferred approach in the sense that the ecosystem approach takes a holistic and integrated view of the challenges facing the particular situation. And it is more inclusive in the sense that it involves more stakeholders, fishers, coastal communities, scientists, academia, civil society, in their efforts to manage the human activity in the natural environment using the best scientific information available at that time. I'm going to wind it down and just say that sustainable use demands that we conserve and protect biodiversity. They are critical and essential components to support all forms of life, particularly in the marine environment, in order to ensure that our ecosystems are healthy, they remain abundant, and they mitigate against certain risks. We heard about climate change, ocean acidification, and I would add sargassum here as well. It is a significant threat to the health of the natural habitats, such as mangroves, which is where a lot of the species go to spawn, and so on. Now, in terms of sustainable use again, there are measures that are required to be taken to strengthen the management of our marine biodiversity and environment, such as in order to, over here. In order to ensure that marine reserves, marine protected areas, and other effective area-based conservation measures are in place. These are all important, right? Just as I wind down again, sustainable use relies on utilizing the best scientific evidence available at the particular point in time and sound data research to guide technicians and to guide policymakers when we're developing national, regional, and international policy and agreements. And Eugene would have alluded to the fact that sometimes you go to these international meetings and it just appears as though common sense is just, they left it at the door, right? They just left it right at the door. And decisions are made that are not necessarily in our best interests here. And so we must always stand on the side of science and data to guide our decision making. Time is upon us, but I also just want to say that the principle is recognized in many international agreements. Milton would have alluded to some, but as we examine and move towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 2, to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture and add fisheries as well. And Goal 14, life below water, all recognize the principle of sustainable use and as key to improving the lives and the livelihoods of people. And so I just would want to say thank you for your attention. I know time is upon us, and there may be some questions. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much for that presentation. It certainly reminded me of a few things, certainly enlightened me. I'm sure I'm speaking for others as well. What I'm going to propose, given that we're behind time, is that we take one question from the chair, one from the audience present, and one online, and then we'll decide where we move from thereafter. And so the question I'll propose or pose is that, well, when we consider the term sustainable use is a globally recognized term, and that SDG 14, Life Below Water, captures this when it says, conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. It is important that we not forget that there is a local aspect of this. Sovereignty was mentioned. No one left behind was mentioned. And so my question to the panelists are, what more needs to be done to ensure that the members of the various communities with these sovereign rights have a more idealized say in the use and management of marine resources in their respective locations and or globally? And so I'll leave the panelists to respond if they are inclined. Yes, go ahead, please.
As usual.
Thank you very much. And I'll ask Mr. Severin to respond, and then Mr. Mealis wanted to say something.
For us, the Center of Sustainable Use has to do with a term we have in our Fisheries Act called generative development. And while we are familiar with the term sustainable development, for us it's regenerative development, meaning that while we ensure that the use that we are making of a resource, that we are doing things to make sure that it can regenerate itself over time, and that we put thresholds, we put limits that once it reaches that particular limit, we stop use, allow it to regenerate itself, and when the threshold levels are surpassed, then we can continue use. But I think sometimes on the international level that terms are used and we never define them for us in the Caribbean. Did we ever sit together as a group of Caribbean people and say what sustainable use means for us and give ourselves a definition? So when our international partners sit with us and they say sustainable use, we say, hey, this is what it means for us. It doesn't mean no use. It doesn't mean a restriction on use. If we set an area as a marine protected area, it says there that all efforts should be placed to ensure that in the use of the marine resources, that we are doing things to sustain itself, at the same time sustain us as human beings on Earth.
Thank you very much. Yes, please go ahead, Ms.
Just
Masayo.
I think this has to be a discussion that moves beyond policymakers. This has to be a national discussion. And in order for that to happen, it requires ongoing education. It requires ongoing enlightenment. It requires the average person in the street to understand the importance of fisheries to our lives, our livelihoods, our future, our economy. And more importantly, it requires governments to have a sustained plan to recruit young people into the profession to ensure it's the profession's, the sector's sustainability. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Horton. Thank you very much for those contributions.
Right, a very important question that you ask, and I just wanted to make 2 points that I think are really important, because you're asking about involvement of the local people, really, at the end of it. And this is something that I think we need to reflect on. It is critically, vitally important that we engage with our stakeholders, as simple as it sounds. The fact of the matter is that when you step back and see what is happening, and I think Eugene was alluding to some of that, to a great extent, what is happening has been driven by people outside of our countries, outside of the region, and we have to be very careful of that because they really do not understand our issues, our challenges, our aspirations in the region. And unless the needs and the views of the local communities that are dependent on these resources for their livelihoods, for their food, for their basic nutrition, are involved and a key participant in the process, we will have trouble. And so what is happening now to a great extent, in my opinion, is not adequately factoring in the views of the local fishermen, the views of the fishing communities, and those who have such a great stake in the resource. Now, I think the NGOs and international organizations, they all have a role to play, but we need to make sure it is balanced. And that is the second word I want to emphasize here, the need for balance. We have to use these resources and we must protect them also. But at the end of the day, our objective ought to be focused on ensuring long-term sustainable benefits for people. People should be at the center of our measures and initiatives so that we are protecting, conserving, managing for the benefit of people and our societies, our countries. If we have that perspective, then I think we are on the right path. But, right now, there's a lot of confusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll give Mr. Melis 30 seconds to respond. I understand we have 3 minutes, then we'll have to be completely
I'll
done.
introduce myself, and the way I do will make the point. I'm a lawyer, farmer, fisherman, conservationist. Don't call me an environmentalist. don't call me a preservationist. I eat meat, I go hunting, I fish commercially and recreationally. And we have to educate the public constituency on the difference, as my lawyer colleague here did very well, but there's a conservationist are the ones who look after the resource so that we can do it from generation to generation to generation. The big NGOs, international organizations, they are stampeding and driving our governments and our people and our youth and our education system in a preservationist mode. And we have to teach people to go back to the basic that everybody's saying. Conservation means wise, sustainable resources have to. When I was a boy, we used the word renewable resources. And everything we do, the resource has to remain renewable. And that's got to become part of our ground culture. And otherwise, I had the privilege of going to the first biodiversity expert conference in 1983. That's how old I am. And from then, we were being told by the experts lecturing decision makers, you have to follow and consult and know the views of the local people. The whole Earth Summit was supposed to be anthropocentric, not preservationist-centric. So we all talk in the same language.
Yes, I'll ask you to bear with me one more minute. We would like to have at least one question from the viewers online. And so I see Mr. Carlos Mazal hand is raised, and we'll immediately turn it over to Dr. Grant to conclude our proceedings today. Yes, Mr. Mazal, you can go ahead and unmute your mic, please, and pose your
Can you hear
question.
me? Can
Yes.
you hear me, Ambassador?
Yes, I
Thank you
can.
very much. Greetings to everyone. I was about to say something, but I think the closing, the last speakers said it for me. There are 3.3 billion people that depend on proteins from the seed to survive. 54 million direct jobs, $420 billion in both aquaculture and wildlife fishing. So we owe it to them to continue and increase it. Otherwise, those who now are trying to close the seas, mainly NGOs, that in the Caribbean and Latin America, 95% are financed by developed countries.
Yeah.
And we know that whoever pays more or less decides. But I also wanted to emphasize what Joanne, our dear friend, Minister Messiah, once minister, forever Minister Messiah, that conservation and sustainable use are two sides of the same coin. In fact, sustainable use can be considered conservation. But this goes to, I finish right here, what Eugene was saying about distorting some of these terms. You know, there are like sustainable development and others. Marine protected areas, it is a case-by-case situation. There's no one size fits all. Daniel Pauly, a famous guru promoting them, has just corrected his assessment, and like many others have retracted some papers. And this goes to show that in the high seas, for example, they don't make any sense. And we have fisheries measures that we can take instead. But to all extractive activities, like what Joanne just said about genetic marine resources, you can find in some microorganisms at some depth, for which we have no financing or technology, cures by taking what we call genetic sequences and put them together with others and come up with something cosmetics, but also cancer, neurodegenerative, and we're rich about that. So once, just to close, and this is it, Milton, the key word is that's it. We can do both. We can do both. So balance. No extremes of any source. So thank you very much, Lester, for allowing me one word.
Thank you very much for your comments, and I'll turn it immediately over to Dr. Grant to conclude our proceedings today. Thank you very much for your attention.
We have minus 3 minutes, but I just want to say, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming. Thanks for joining us at the CWA 2023 on this beautiful island of the Bahamas. We especially want to thank the government of the Bahamas and the Department of Marine Resources for their assistance and their continued collaborations. Thanks for being part of the CRFM at 20 anniversary celebrations. And this is the 5th of our webinar seminar series and on the sustainable use of living marine resources. Tomorrow we have all day, 3 other seminars that we want to feature as well. We want to thank all our presenters there today, especially, thank you. We especially want to thank Joanne Messiah for drafting the regional protocol on the principle of sustainable use of marine living resources for blue economic growth and sustainable development of CRFM member states. And this was adopted yesterday by the CRFM Ministerial Council as a common guiding policy framework for member states. Thanks also for Lester for doing an able job at moderating this meeting. So we want to thank all the attendees. And like the last speaker said, I want to end with the same thing. We can create that balance between harvesting and use. Thank you again for coming.